wedding photo showed them smiling, but if you looked close enough, you could see the fear in her eyes. Grandma Rose used to say that some people are born with storms following them, and others spend their whole lives trying to outrun the thunder. She never could have imagined that her own grandson would become both the storm and the one running from it. Deshaun Anderson had calloused hands at 22, the kind that came from stacking boxes at the warehouse since he was 16, saving every dollar for a dream that felt as distant as the moon. His mother, Cheryl, worked double shifts at Detroit General, coming home with stories about people who had everything and people who had nothing, and how thin the line between them really was. "Baby, you keep your head in them books," she'd tell him every morning before her shift, coffee growing cold in a chipped mug that read "World's Best Mom," a Mother's Day gift from when Deshaun was 8 and thought $5 could buy the world. Education is the only thing they can't take from you. But sometimes life takes everything anyway. The first time Deshaun met Professor Elena Blackwood was on a Tuesday that started like any other. He'd rushed from his morning shift to make it to constitutional law, still smelling like cardboard and industrial soap, sliding into the back row of Harvard's most intimidating lecture hall. At 23, he was older than most of his classmates, and it showed in the way he carried himself, careful, grateful, like someone who knew the weight of second chances. Elena Blackwood commanded the room without raising her voice. 78 years old, silver hair pulled back in an elegant bun, she moved through complex legal theories like she was telling bedtime stories. But there was something else about her, a loneliness that reminded Deshaun of his own grandmother in her final years, when the house got too quiet and the memories got too loud.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
After class, he approached her desk where she was gathering papers with hands that trembled just slightly. "Professor Blackwood, I wanted to thank you for today's lecture. The way you explained Miranda rights, it made something click for me." She looked up, studying his face with sharp blue eyes that missed nothing. "You're Deshaun Anderson. Full scholarship, Detroit Public Schools, worked your way here." He nodded, surprised she knew. "I make it my business to know my students, especially the ones who understand that law isn't just theory. It's the difference between justice and just us." She smiled at her own wordplay. "Walk with me, Mr. Anderson." They walked across campus in comfortable silence until she stopped at a bench overlooking the Charles River. "Tell me, what do you see when you look out there?" Deshaun studied the water, the joggers, the boats cutting through gentle waves. "I see people living their lives. Some struggling upstream, some floating downstream, all of them just trying to get somewhere safe." Elena nodded slowly. "That's exactly right. And that's exactly why I think you and I should talk more." What started as academic mentorship grew into something deeper. Elena began inviting Deshaun to her Cambridge home, a 3-story Victorian filled with law books and memories. She'd cook simple meals, nothing fancy, just comfort food that reminded him of home, and they'd talk about everything from Supreme Court cases to the weight of representing people who looked like him in courtrooms that rarely did. "You remind me of my son," she said one evening, watching Deshaun help her organize case files. "Thomas, he would have been about your age now." "Would have been?" Her voice grew quiet. "Leukemia took him when he was 7. That was 40 years ago, but some wounds never quite heal." Deshaun stopped sorting papers. "I'm sorry, Professor." "Elena," she corrected gently. "And don't be sorry. Be present. That's all any of us can do." The months passed like pages in a book neither of them wanted to finish. Elena taught Deshaun about law, but more importantly, she taught him about dignity. How to carry himself in rooms where he wasn't expected. How to speak truth to power without losing his soul in the process. "You're going to be a magnificent attorney," she told him one December evening as snow began to fall outside her kitchen window. "But more than that, you're going to be a good man. That matters more than any degree." It was during Christmas break of his second year when Elena made an offer that changed everything. "Deshaun, I need to discuss something important with you." She sat across from him in her living room, fireplace crackling, her hands folded in her lap. "I've been thinking about my estate, about what happens to everything when I'm gone." "Elena, you don't need to. Let me finish." Her voice carried the authority of a woman who'd spent decades commanding courtrooms. "I have no living relatives, no children to inherit what I've built. My estate is worth approximately $8 million. Deshaun's coffee cup froze halfway to his lips. "I want to leave a portion of it to you. Not because you need it, though Lord knows every young lawyer could use a head start. I want to leave it to you, because you've given me something I thought I'd lost forever: purpose. Elena, I can't accept. You can and you will. But there's a complication. She leaned forward, her expression growing serious. My nephew, Robert Blackwood, has been circling like a vulture since his father died. He's expecting to inherit everything, and he's not the type of man who handles disappointment well. Robert Blackwood was everything Deshawn wasn't: trust fund confidence wrapped in tailored suits. The kind of man who'd never worked a day in his life, but spoke about merit like he'd invented it. He'd visited Elena exactly 3 times in the past 2 years, each visit coinciding with times when his various business ventures needed bailouts. The only way to ensure the will can't be contested, Elena continued, is if you and I were married. It would be a legal arrangement, nothing more. You'd be my heir, and Robert would have no claim. Deshawn stared at her, processing words that seemed to rearrange themselves in the air between them. I know how it sounds, Elena said quickly. I know what people will say. But I also know that you're the only person who's looked at me and seen a human being instead of a bank account. Elena, think about it. That's all I ask. That night, Deshawn walked the streets of Cambridge until his feet ached, Elena's offer echoing in his mind. He thought about his mother, working herself to exhaustion to keep their heads above water. He thought about the kids in his old neighborhood, who'd never see the inside of a classroom like the ones he sat in every day. He thought about the weight of being chosen by someone who didn't have to choose him. The next morning, he knocked on Elena's door with his answer. Yes, he said simply, but not for the money. For you. Because everyone deserves to leave this world knowing they mattered to someone. Elena's eyes filled with tears she didn't try to hide. Thank you, dear boy. Thank you. The wedding was a quiet affair at Cambridge City Hall on a Thursday morning in February. Elena wore a simple blue dress. Deshawn wore the only suit he owned, the one he'd bought for job interviews with money saved from his warehouse job. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes, but the courthouse photographer captured something real in their faces. Not romance, but genuine affection between 2 people who'd found family in unexpected places. They celebrated with coffee and donuts at a diner where Elena was a regular, where the waitress called her honey, and didn't bat an eye at the marriage certificate on the table between them. So what now? Deshawn asked, stirring sugar into his coffee. Now we go home, Elena said. Now we live our lives. And now you finish law school and become the lawyer this world needs. For 2 weeks, they settled into an easy routine. Elena continued teaching, Deshawn continued studying. In the evenings, they'd share dinner and conversation, 2 people building something that looked like family from the materials they had on hand. But happiness, Deshawn was learning, could be as fragile as trust. On a Saturday morning in early March, while Deshawn was at the library studying for finals, Elena received a visitor. Robert Blackwood arrived unannounced, fury radiating from his expensive shoes to his perfectly styled hair. "Aunt Elena, we need to talk." She led him into the living room, though every instinct told her to keep the conversation at the doorway. "I heard about your little wedding," Robert said, his voice dripping with disgust. "Really, Elena? A kid barely out of diapers? Are you that desperate for attention? Watch your tone, Robert. Or what? You'll leave everything to your child husband." He laughed, but there was nothing funny in the sound. "Do you have any idea how this looks? How this makes our family look?" "This family," Elena said carefully, "is whoever I choose it to be." Robert's face darkened. "That boy is using you. Can't you see that? He's playing the long game, waiting for you to die so he can cash in." "You mean like you've been doing for the past 10 years? The words hung in the air like smoke from a fire neither of them could put out. Robert stood up, his movements sharp and angry. "This isn't over, Elena. I won't let you destroy everything our family built for some charity case who doesn't even belong here." After he left, Elena sat in her chair by the window, hands shaking as she reached for her phone to call Deshawn. But the call never connected. Because 2 hours later, neighbors would find Elena Blackwood dead in her study, a single gunshot wound to her head, her husband's fingerprints on the weapon that killed her.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
The arrest happened so fast it felt like a dream painted in nightmare colors. Deshawn was walking back from the library when police cars surrounded him, officers shouting commands that seemed to come from underwater. "Handcuffs!" Wrights read in a voice that sounded nothing like Elena's careful explanations of Miranda warnings. Questions asked in a room that smelled like fear and fluorescent lights. Where were you between 2 and 4 p.m. today? Library. I have my card skin records. Pretty convenient alibi for someone who just inherited $8 million. I didn't kill her. Sure you didn't. Young black man marries rich white woman. She dies 2 weeks later. What are we supposed to think? The media circus began before Deshawn even made it to his arraignment. Headlines screamed across every platform. Gold digger's deadly game. Harvard student accused of murdering wife for fortune. His student ID photo appeared next to Elena's professional headshot. The contrast carefully chosen to tell the story prosecutors wanted the world to believe. The trial was a masterclass in how quickly society could decide someone's guilt based on who they were rather than what they'd done. Prosecutor Jennifer Walsh painted Deshawn as a cold-blooded manipulator who'd preyed on Elena's loneliness for financial gain. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Walsh said during opening statements, the defendant saw an opportunity and he took it. An elderly woman, isolated and vulnerable, worth millions of dollars. He befriended her, gained her trust, convinced her to marry him, and then eliminated her when he no longer needed her alive. Deshawn's court-appointed attorney, a well-meaning but overworked public defender named James Martinez, did his best with limited resources. But the evidence seemed overwhelming. Deshawn's fingerprints on the gun, his presence in the house, the will that made him a beneficiary, and the rushed timeline of their marriage. My client is guilty of one thing only, Martinez argued, caring about an elderly woman who needed companionship. The prosecution wants you to believe that kindness is a crime, that genuine affection across racial and generational lines is somehow sinister. Don't let their prejudices become your verdict. But Robert Blackwood was a compelling witness, dressed in a grief-stricken nephew's best performance. My aunt was a brilliant woman, he testified, dabbing his eyes with a handkerchief. But she was also lonely since my uncle died. This defendant took advantage of that loneliness. He manipulated her into changing her will, convinced her to marry him, and when he had what he wanted legally secured, he killed her. The jury deliberated for just 4 hours before returning with a verdict that sucked the air from Deshawn's lungs. Guilty of first-degree murder. 25 years to life. The transport van to state prison smelled like disinfectant and broken dreams. Deshawn stared at his reflection in the scratched window and barely recognized the young man looking back, hollow-eyed, defeated, carrying a weight that seemed heavier than the shackles around his ankles. Prison taught him things Harvard never could. How to sleep when every sound might mean danger. How to eat food that tasted like cardboard and be grateful for it. How to measure time not in semesters, but in appeals denied and hopes deferred. His mother visited when she could, taking buses that left Detroit at 4 a.m. to spend 30 minutes talking through plexiglass that made her voice sound like it was coming from another world. "Baby, I know you didn't do this," she'd say every time, her hand pressed against the glass like she could touch him through it. "I know my son. Sometimes knowing isn't enough, Mama." The years blurred together like pages in a book written in disappearing ink. Deshawn worked in the prison library, teaching literacy classes to inmates who'd been failed by every system they'd ever encountered. He wrote letters to Elena that he never sent, keeping alive conversations with someone who could no longer answer. 10 years into his sentence, hope arrived in the form of investigative journalist Maya Thompson, a sister who'd built her career uncovering truths that powerful people preferred to keep buried. She'd been researching wrongful convictions when Deshawn's case caught her attention, not because of the headlines, but because of what wasn't in them. "The timeline never made sense to me," Maya told Deshawn during their first visit, her notebook open between them like a bridge across years of injustice. "You had 2 weeks to plan a murder, but you chose to do it in broad daylight in a house with security cameras? That's either the dumbest criminal in history or someone who never planned to commit a crime at all." Maya dug where the original investigation hadn't bothered to look. She discovered that the security footage from Elena's house had been mysteriously corrupted on the day of the murder. She found witnesses who'd seen Robert's car in Elena's neighborhood that afternoon, witnesses the police had never interviewed. Most damning of all, she uncovered financial records showing that Robert had been desperate for money to cover gambling debts that would have destroyed him if Elena hadn't died when she did. "Elena left you in her will," Maya explained during one of their meetings. But what the prosecution never mentioned was that she'd also recently discovered Robert had been forging her signature on checks. She was planning to press charges against him the week after she died. The breakthrough came when Maya tracked down Patricia Reeves, Elena's former housekeeper, who'd moved to Florida after the murder and had been too afraid to speak up during the original trial. "I saw Mr. Robert there that day," Patricia told Maya, her voice shaking even years later. "He was angry, shouting at Miss Elena about the will. When I went to clean the next week, I found broken glass in the study that wasn't there before. And the gun. That gun was supposed to be locked in Mr. Elena's bedroom safe. Someone had to know the combination." Maya presented her findings to the Innocence Project, and slowly, like ice cracking in spring, the case began to thaw.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
New DNA testing on the gun revealed traces of Robert's skin cells on the trigger. Financial records subpoenaed during the reinvestigation showed massive debts and insurance policies Robert had secretly taken out on Elena's life. When Robert Blackwood was finally arrested, 12 years after Deshawn's conviction, he was boarding a private jet to a country with no extradition treaty. The marshals found him with false documents and enough cash to last several lifetimes. "Any comment on the charges?" a reporter shouted as Robert was led away in handcuffs. He looked directly into the camera, his mask finally slipping. "That boy never deserved what she gave him. I was family. I was blood." The courtroom for Deshawn's exoneration hearing was packed with people who'd followed his story, who'd watched Maya's documentary, who'd come to witness justice finally stumbling its way toward the truth. Deshawn sat at the defense table in a suit that actually fit, provided by a legal aid organization that specialized in wrongful conviction cases. The judge who presided over the hearing was the Honorable Patricia McCall, a black woman who'd spent her career watching the system fail people who looked like her son, her nephew, her community. "Mr. Anderson," Judge McCall said, her voice carrying the weight of 12 years of injustice, "on behalf of this court and this state, I want to say what should have been said long ago. We were wrong. You are innocent. You are free. And while we cannot give you back the years that were stolen from you, we can ensure that the record reflects the truth." The gallery erupted in applause, but Deshawn didn't hear it. He was thinking about Elena, about conversations they'd never have, about the lawyer he might have become if fear hadn't dressed itself up as justice and convinced 12 people that love was a crime. Robert Blackwood's trial was swift and merciless. The evidence Maya had uncovered, combined with his attempted flight, painted a picture of a man who'd killed his own aunt for money and then watched an innocent person pay the price for 13 years. "You took everything from me," Deshawn said during the victim impact statement, looking directly at Robert for the first time since the original trial. "You took my freedom, my future, my chance to become the man Elena believed I could be. But you didn't take my truth, and you didn't take hers." Robert was sentenced to life without parole. As he was led away, he turned to Deshawn one last time. "She gave you everything," he said, his voice filled with a bitterness that had consumed his soul. "And you weren't even her real family." Deshawn stood up slowly, his voice clear and strong. "Yes, I was. That's what you never understood. Family isn't about blood. It's about choice. And she chose me because I chose her first." Walking out of that courthouse as a free man felt like being born into a world that had forgotten him. Deshawn was 35 years old. His mother had gray hair now, and the neighborhood he'd grown up in had changed in ways that made it feel like visiting someone else's memories. The state compensation for wrongful imprisonment helped, but money couldn't buy back time or trust or the easy faith in justice he'd once carried. Deshawn used the settlement to start the Elena Blackwood Foundation, providing legal aid to families who couldn't afford to fight for their innocence, scholarships for students who looked like him, and support for elderly people vulnerable to financial abuse. He never finished law school. Too much time had passed, too much had changed. Instead, he became something different, an advocate, a voice for the voiceless, a reminder that the system only worked when people forced it to. On what would have been Elena's 80th birthday, Deshawn visited her grave, bringing flowers and the final paper he'd been working on when she died, a constitutional law essay about the presumption of innocence. He left it by her headstone, weighed down with a small stone he'd carried in his pocket through 13 years of imprisonment. "We did it, Elena," he whispered to the wind that carried his words across the cemetery. "We proved that love is stronger than lies, that truth doesn't have an expiration date, that justice might be slow, but it doesn't have to be colorblind to finally see clearly." Maya Thompson's documentary about the case, Chosen Family, won 3 Emmy Awards and sparked nationwide conversations about wrongful convictions, racial bias in the justice system, and the price of assuming guilt before proving innocence. But for Deshawn, the real victory was smaller and more personal. The knowledge that Elena's last act of love had been choosing someone who would honor her memory by fighting for others who needed choosing. He never married again, though not from fear or bitterness. He simply understood, in a way most people never would, that some connections transcend time and circumstance, that some families are built from choice rather than chance, and that the most powerful legacy you can leave is the knowledge that you saw someone's worth when the world refused to look. The Elena Blackwood Foundation continues to operate today, funded by speaking engagements where Deshawn tells his story not for sympathy, but for understanding. He speaks at law schools, community centers, and churches, carrying Elena's lesson wherever people will listen. That dignity is a choice, justice is a practice, and love is the only inheritance that multiplies when you give it away. People ask me if I'm angry. Deshawn often says at the end of his speeches, his voice steady and sure. They want to know how I survived 13 years for a crime I didn't commit. The answer is simple. I survived because someone believed in me when I was worth believing in, and I knew that if I let hate win, her choice would have meant nothing. Elena Blackwood taught me that the best revenge against injustice isn't anger. It's becoming the person they said you could never be. The courtroom where Deshawn was wrongfully convicted has since been renamed the Elena Blackwood Justice Center, a reminder that the law is only as strong as the people willing to bend it toward fairness. On the wall hangs a photo of Elena teaching, surrounded by students who went on to become judges, prosecutors, and defenders of the innocent. And in his apartment in Boston, not far from the house where he and Elena shared those brief but precious weeks as family, Deshawn keeps a photo from their wedding day, not because it represents the beginning of his nightmare, but because it captures the moment two people chose each other across every line society had drawn between them. Some storms, Grandma Rose used to say, teach you how to dance in the rain. Others teach you that the sun was always there, waiting behind the clouds. Justice isn't always swift, but when it comes, it carries the weight of every truth that refused to stay buried, every voice that refused to be silenced, every love that proved stronger than fear. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the presumption of innocence or the power of chosen family, or the price of judging people by their circumstances rather than their character, then Elena's legacy lives on. Like and subscribe to keep these stories alive, because somewhere right now, someone innocent is sitting in a cell, waiting for their Maya Thompson, their truth teller, their reminder that justice delayed doesn't have to mean justice denied forever.